Big crowd. Awesome topic, yeah? Highlight of my career, I get to speak about an acronym. PCI DSS. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure, 1,000 people will come in a little later, but excited to be here. Thankful for SAINTCON for letting me speak a little bit. And we're going to be talking today on this thing called PCI DSS. For the uninitiated, PCI stands for Payment Card Industry, and DSS is Data Security Standard. So if you're in the wrong room, then you're in the wrong room, right? Hopefully not. So who is this guy and why should you listen to me? I'm Gary Glover. I work at a company called SecurityMetrics here in the Valley. And so I've been doing cybersecurity for about 18 years, working for SecurityMetrics for that whole time. January will be my 19th year at SecurityMetrics. So just a little bit of time here working with the payment card industry and with data security and stuff like that. So before that, I was a developer, software developer for 10 years. I worked for a small company called Novell, and then another company called Corda, which is now Domo. Maybe people have heard of Domo here in the Valley. So at Novell, I wrote all the printer driver download code for NetWare. So if anybody even remembers what a printer driver is, then you're old like me. Before that, for 7 years, I was a mechanical engineer at an aerospace company called McDonnell Douglas, worked on things like space station, Mars rover, single stage to orbit, did a little antimatter propulsion research, stuff like that. So this is my third career. Hopefully this one sticks till the end. That's what I'm hoping for, right? So that's who I am. This is who I work for, SecurityMetrics. We've been around since 2000, and we do lots of different things. Security assessments and consulting and penetration testing, those are the areas that I'm involved with at SecurityMetrics. And digital forensics, we also do vulnerability assessment, scanning. So we're an ASV, an authorized scan vendor in the PCI, the payment card space. We also do some managed security services. So that would be things like managing people's firewalls, small merchant firewalls, things like that. Also some internal scanning, internal vulnerability scanning appliances, things like that. We also work with security compliance programs, which would be us working with really, hundreds of thousands of small companies, helping them fill out self-assessment questionnaires, answer look at their scans, answer questions about their scans, stuff like that. So that's kind of what SecurityMetrics does. We do that for kind of PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, things like that. So that's a little bit on SecurityMetrics. We're kind of right at 1600 North, right by the freeway. You might have seen our building there. So a little bit more about kind of me and my PCI DSS background. Why am I here speaking on this? Why did SAINTCON have me come to speak to all you people? I kind of started doing PCI before it even existed. There was a program called CISSP, which was a Visa program. Card brands had their own kind of data security programs before that. Then PCI DSS 1.0 came around, and that was a result of the card brands actually trying to play nice together, which they typically don't do very well. And so they got together, came up with a common set of security standards, and started PCI DSS. And it's been a little bit more structured as time goes on. Back in the early days, it was kind of cowboyish. You just sort of wrote whatever you wanted, and the assessment was a little more open. Now they're getting a little bit more tight on some of those things as far as that. The card brands formed something called the PCI Council, which is a group that actually manages the standard itself, kind of a standards body. And they're made up of independent people, and then the card brands have some representation on the PCI Council. So that's a little bit about where that comes from. But it's changing over time. It's a good thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Over the years, I've been a member of a lot of different task forces in the payment card space, small merchant task forces and encryption and cloud computing and penetration testing, special interest groups, and all kinds of different things over the years. Currently, I'm a member of the PCI Council's GEAR, which is the Global Executive Assessor Roundtable, which allows us as PCI assessors and cybersecurity professionals to give some feedback to the PCI Council themselves rather than them just trying to make up rules in the cloud or in this ivory tower. So we're able to feed back to them some of the real stuff that's happening out in industry. The last one is, why do I like PCI DSS? Hold your tomatoes. I'm sure it's not always a really fun topic for a lot of people. There are some really good things, I think, about it. As far as standards go, there's a number of security frameworks out there in the world, HIPAA and HITRUST and FedRAMP and those kind of things. PCI is one of the standards that actually has some enforcement in place, and people actually are kind of looking at compliance to that. So I think over the last 19 years, there has been some improvement in security in that industry for sure. Plus, it's just a good kind of collection of really good data security things. There's 12 areas, and they're pretty common across any kind of a security framework. So, kind of at the end of the year, it's nice to feel like, hey, I've was able to help a lot of people. I was able to see lots of different networks. I was able to get a lot of experience. It's not a perfect standard, but it's something that's moving forward, I think. So it's not really a fun process. Compliance is really not a fun process to really be in, but it is what it is. So a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. We're going to do a little quick background on PCI DSS as far as history goes, some characteristics of the new 4.0 changes, maybe some timelines. Kind of the topic, what should you be doing now? What's next? Some of the top 10 changes. We won't go over all the changes, but some of the main changes that I think are going to be most that affect most people. Customized approach is a new kind of way of validating compliance, and this is a do or do not kind of a thing. Do you want to use that? We'll talk about what that means and sum up kind of some of the immediate changes, wrap up, and then have time for QA if there is any time for that. So before we do that, I sort of just wanted to get an idea. How many people have heard of PCI DSS before? So well, look, everybody here in the audience, that's great. That's probably why you're here, right? How many of you have been audited before? So we got a few. So how many have been audited twice? Hold up your hands. You've been audited more than once? Anybody? One guy back there, two, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So 4 times. So you guys both had 4 times, right? So hold up your hands again. So just to give back to the community, I have some socks for you guys who have been audited more than 4 times. So Winnie, help me out there. Winnie is my beautiful assistant. She's going to pass out the socks to those guys with their hands up. Was there 3? Did you have 3? Here's another one. Uh-oh. All right, here's another one. So that's cool. How many, how long, who's been in cybersecurity the longest? So how many have been in cybersecurity for 5 years? Okay, 10 years. I can't see very good. 15 years. 20 years. Wait, is that there's one guy still 22? 22, 23, 20. So what was 20 again? We got 2 guys, 20. Wait, are you one of the guys that won the socks too? So one other guy? All right, here's one. So if you won socks, I think, weren't you the guy who actually called it cybersecurity? Is that what, you're the guy? So those 2 guys that have been in for over 20 years, we got some t-shirts for you. If those are the wrong size, you can go to our booth and exchange them. So interesting, so this is something that's really been around for a long time, PCI DSS compliance, and kind of all fun aside, I think really you probably feel better when you get through this process. It's nasty. It's not necessarily fun, but you probably feel a little bit better. It's a big accomplishment. So let's move on here. So this is the little quick history lesson. December 2004 was the first version of PCI DSS. I started in January of 2005, so just kind of right in there. At the time, they had barely come out with it. I think really nobody knew about it until January of 2005. That was 1.0. 2.0 was October of 2010, so that's kind of a 5-year gap there. 3.0 was 2013, 3 years. 3.2.1, May 2018. There's, some versions in between there. You can tell, 3.2 came out and then 3.2.1 came out right after it because of some SSL certificate challenges. Not everybody is perfect, and the standard evolves, and that's a good thing. And then 4.0 came out this year in April 2022. It really hasn't changed a whole lot as far as there's 12 main areas of the security controls. Those are the same. It's just been changed throughout this time period to keep up with the industry, bad actors, new technology, et cetera, et cetera. So there's the history lesson. Here's some quick stats on 4.0. There are 53 new requirements that will apply to everybody who undertakes to be compliant to PCI DSS. Now, that sounds pretty amazing. That sounds like a lot. Out of 353 are new. I don't know that they're new. They may actually, a lot of them are kind of similar to the last version requirements, that they're adding maybe a new aspect. So it's not like there's, the council sat around and said, how could we screw up people? Let's think of 53 totally new things that nobody will have any idea of what to do, and then we'll give them a couple of years and see if they can figure it out, right? I mean, that's not really the idea. So most of them will be fairly familiar. There'll just be some kind of changes to how they're validated, for example. 11 new requirements that will apply just to service providers alone, and then 13 of that total, the 53 plus 11, are things that are effective immediately. And we'll go kind of through a few of those later. So what are the characteristics of 4.0? You can see that our slide helper here is super happy about the changes that have been made in 4.0, as all of you are. I can see everybody smiling about all the changes that are coming in PCI 4.0. The requirements are a little bit redesigned to focus on security objectives. Again, not a whole lot of change as far as topics and controls, but they're reorganized a little bit, reworded a bit to focus on objectives. We're changing from what you must do to what the resulting security should be for that kind of for that requirement. The changes were really made with a lot of industry feedback over the course of their RFCs, the request for comments. The council actually went through 6,000 feedback items, and they went through every one of them. And a lot of them were from people, that are actually doing audits. A lot of them for people that are conducting those audits. A lot of them are from other areas. So 6,000 is a lot of things. So people really got quite involved in the development of this. So it's not just some, council of 8 people sitting in a closed room and waiting to figure out, how to change the world, and then when they're done, they let the smoke loose, and people know that there's a new standard, right? It's like choosing a new pope. So it's not like that. They really have looked at a lot of feedback from industry. A lot of the changes are clarifications. And again, very familiar. They've just making a clarification in something. All the changes are not immediate. There are many of them that are future dated, that they give more time, and we'll talk about some of those going up. There's lots of transition time. These future dated changes don't really come until 2025. We'll look at that. But again, there's no changes to the basic principles. So let's look at kind of the timeline. I don't know if you can see that very well, but first part of this year, Q2, beginning of Q2, they released 4.0. Then 4.0 kind of is introduced during this last year to people. Right? We as a QSA company, we haven't done one 4.0 audit since April. So nobody is really just jumping right in and saying, sign me up. Now, one thing we did get from somebody, one of our QSA assessors actually got a an attestation of compliance for 4.0 even before anyone was able to be audited by 4.0. So that was actually pretty cool. So they just decided to download the AOC form, fill it out as if they were compliant. We quickly figured that out because we weren't even allowed to conduct one of those audits yet. But anyway, there's about a year, there's a 2-year transition period from April 2022 to March 31st, 2024. You can see there where that's the transition period between 3.2.1, the current version, and 4.0. 3.2.1 is still something that's viable. You can still fill that out. You can still use that as a standard. It's still a good standard. And then another year past that, clear into March 31st of 2025, is the time when the new requirements that are future dated have to be implemented. So in March of 2025, you have to have all those things implemented if you are assessed after that time for the new requirements that are future dated. So, it's not, it's not like it's coming immediately, but it's also not time to just totally relax and say, well, I got till 2025, I don't even have to think about this. Let's go back to be doing the normal stuff that we do. Let's hope we can get through our next audit, right? So you should be really thinking about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about some ideas of what you can be doing here soon. So, and that's right next. What should you do first? I think most people's first reaction is to complain. So go ahead, complain, get that out. Yeah, thank you very much. What do you think? Let's give me something. Give me something. Because it's not going away, unfortunately, right? So it's okay to complain. It's okay to think change is coming. Change is what life is all about. Drag, right? But this is something I think that is going to be a good thing. Keep calm. You can still focus on 3.2.1, and don't, you shouldn't just all of a sudden get freaked out and say, oh no, the sky is falling, and lose focus even on the things that you're currently doing. Getting prepared and being compliant to 3.2.1 is going to get you 90% of the way to 4.0, right? So it's not like the sky is falling, the world is changing that much. You got plenty of transition time, just don't squander it. So as you can see, our helper here, he's helping you understand it's time to focus, it's time to study, and something you could do now between now and the end of the year is really sit down and read and study. There is a really great changes document that the council has put out that actually goes through each individual requirement and shows here's what it was, here's what it is now, and here's the type of change it is. It's just a wording change, or it's a new requirement, et cetera, et cetera. So be familiar with that changes document. That's for those of you who are familiar with PCI DSS already. If you're not, maybe you start by reading the standard at first. But I think that changes document is a great place to start. Make sure you're very familiar with that. That can be downloaded from the PCI Council's website. The next thing you would do would be then to start with the whole standard and kind of just get familiar with how the new standard is laid out. There's some great new wording in the guidance column. So that's an awesome thing to be familiar with. There's a lot more knowledge there and to help you understand the intent of these requirements. Read blogs, articles, papers, that kind of stuff. Obviously there's tons of those things published out there by many different companies. SecurityMetrics has a lot of those available as well. One thing I think that's really important is in the standard itself, because they're coming up with this new validation method we'll talk about in a minute called the customized approach. On many of the requirements, they'll have a section at the bottom that says the customized approach objective. So if you really want to know what they're trying to do with a requirement, you look for this customized approach objective and you go, oh, I see, they're really trying to improve this thing, or they're trying to make sure that we have this thing handled, this requirement, this control, this security item. So that's a great resource for you to just be familiar with the new format of the standard paperwork itself. The introductory sections in the whole standard have been revamped. There's a lot more information there. There's a lot more. There's a glossary included at the end. There's more detailed explanations of various things. So spend some time actually just reading the standard. Make sure you have lots of hot pockets, coffee, whatever keeps you awake, because it is not going to be exciting. I'm sorry, unless you really like this kind of stuff. But it is important. It may not be exciting, but it is important. And many of you are involved in your company's compliance program or are given responsibilities over systems that have to meet that compliance. So it's not, again, something that's going away. It's not something that's really hard to do. You just have to get down and do it and really understand it. It's better to learn it rather than be surprised by it. So minus kind of the future dated stuff, 4.0 is really not a whole lot different than 3.2.1. So if you want to move to 4.0 even as early as next year, that's doable. You're just not going to really worry about the future dated stuff maybe, right? So that could be a potential strategy. After you've gotten kind of your studying done, what are some of your next actions? If it were me, I'd probably sit down and say, let's look at these future dated requirements and let's find out which ones will apply to me, to our systems, to our company, and then start making a plan. What is your 1-year plan? What's your 2-year plan? What are you going to be doing? Because you really do only have 2 years now, because we're at the end of 2022. You've got 2023, 2024, and just a teeny bit of 2025 to get ready. So, you got 2.5 years at the most here to get ready for this. You need to understand what validation methods are there. Now, the direct approach is the same way that you do it now. It's, here's the thing that's written, here's the testing procedure, here's how I do that. Here's how I meet that testing procedure. That's the way that it's been done now. A lot of really large corporations, or maybe people who have a very advanced or a mature security organization, came to the council and said, look, I just don't meet this exactly. I just can't meet these words. But I do have this, and I think this system does even more or meets the intent of PCI, this requirement. Can we do that? So that's why the council came up with this thing called the customized approach, and they will allow you to use that as a validation method. It's not for the faint of heart, and you need to plan early for that. So just kind of think about what things you've got. Can you meet the exact statements in the standard, or do you need to approach it a different way? You may want to get some help. You can work for the QSA to get a 4.0 gap. You may want to look at technology or other solutions, test them out, get used to them. Some of those we'll be talking about in just a minute that you may want to be familiar with. And again, remember, 3.2.1 is still good till 2024, so make sure you're staying focused on your current stuff. Something that will apply to almost every requirement in the new PCI standard is kind of a new concept around risk assessments. In the past, in 3.2.1, well, currently even in 3.2.1, there's kind of one area in Section 12 that says conduct an annual risk assessment. And it's 1 or 2 lines in the standard. People are usually confused about that. Is it formal, and it's based on all these standards? What standard should I use? Blah, blah, blah. It's always been a little confusing for our clients to deal with this risk assessment stuff. And so the council has decided to kind of change that focus a little bit and not have a corporate overall risk assessment, but now make targeted risk assessments for very specific requirements. There's about 9 requirements in the PCI standard that risk assessments are going to have to be done formally to help you determine some of these, for example, a period, how long your encryption key management, your key life is, how long your passwords are going to be good for, blah, blah, blah. There used to be these set things in the standard that would say, here's when we want you to change it, here's when you've got to do it. Now they're saying, you tell us when, based on the risk assessment, and show and prove to your assessor that this is a decent analysis. So it has to be real. It can't just be something that you say, well, that's what our CEO wants, or that's what I want, that's what the head of IT wants, that's what we're doing. Back it up. So that's going to be a new thing. That's going to add some work to the audit for the next time. So that's something to be prepared for. Make sure you're understanding what that really entails, how risk assessments are done, formalize that process. Especially if you're going to be using a customized approach, you're going to have a very detailed risk assessment done on your new control that you've developed to meet the intent of one of the requirements in PCI. That's going to be a big and a heavy lift there. Okay, so let's look at some of the top 10-ish changes that I think, and you'll recognize many of these things are familiar. Again, they're not brand new, they're just some changes. in some of the standards. So Section 1 and Section 2, there really wasn't anything that was worth mentioning. Section 3, which is kind of all about, has always been about encryption. It's still about encryption and encrypting data and making data unusable to people who snag it. In 3.2.1, there was a mention of, hey, make sure that when you're using remote access, don't copy any data. And it was a process that you wanted to do. Now they want it to be an actual mechanism. There needs to be something that prevents the copy and paste of credit card data. That's what PAN stands for, payment account number, to a remote system. That's a future dated 2025 thing. That's going to have to be a solution probably that is part of your remote access software. Again, in 2025, if you're using hashing right now to protect card data, maybe you're using it for lookups or whatever, then you have to use a keyed hash in the future. A keyed hash is different than like a SHA-2 or whatever. It's like a hash, but with a key that you have to manage, like an encryption key. So look it up, read about it. You've got to implement some changes there. It's got to be a keyed hash. That'll be a change in software if you use hashing. Section 4 is all about moving data over public networks. Not much has changed there, other than they want you to have an inventory, a documented inventory of all your SSL certs and transmission, anything that you're using to transmit data, and where they're certified, where you're getting them, when they expire, all that kind of information. So it's not a big deal. You should have been doing that anyway, so now they're just formalizing that and saying, hey, by 2025, this has to be a very detailed list so that you know all about your certs that you're using for moving data around over the internet. Section 5 is the malware and antivirus kind of stuff. Not much has changed there. You still have to have those systems. They have added this process and mechanism must be in place to detect and protect against a phishing attack. That's a 2025 thing. Perhaps it's already part of your email system. A lot of people's email systems already do that kind of stuff. The other thing that has to be added to that is training, employee training for this kind of stuff. We've heard a lot at the conference today about training and making sure that it's effective. This is, again, just backing that up. The council is saying, yes, we agree. Training about phishing is important. Let's get that going. Section 6 is, updates and software development and those kind of things. That's that section. The big one that's been added there is on many people's payment pages. Throughout your web applications, people are more and more using include statements or scripts from third-party sites or from other places. You're including them. You're downloading. You're at one point, some of our forensic guys, I think they found 150 external scripts running on a card payment page where you're typing in your credit card numbers. And that's a lot, right? Some of them are just saying, where's this guy's mouse going? And some of them are, how many times people, have searched for it on Google or, all these different things. So no longer can you just say, well, whoever gave that to me, they're secure, they're responsible for it, right? Now the council is saying, no, we're having too many compromises in those situations. You need to know all the scripts that are running on a payment page. So you have to have a place then where you're going to review, inventory, authorize all those scripts on payment pages. That's a 2025 thing. That's going to be a big deal, I think, and it may make people minimize the number of scripts on a payment page, for example. Section 8, no real big things here other than, they're saying in the past the password length has been 7. Now they say, let's make it 12. We all know that even 12 probably isn't even enough, and passwords really are kind of a thing of the past. We're moving towards other types of authentication and together with multi-factor, those kinds of things layer on that. But moving from 7 to 12 in PCI 4.0, that may not be a big deal. It may be a big deal depending on software that you may write or buy or whatever to make sure that it passes that requirement. That's a 2025 thing, again, so it gives you plenty of time to work with vendors or your own software teams. Again, we've heard a lot about multi-factor authentication today, and it's not a panacea. It's not the thing that solves all your problems. It's just another one of the layers in security that you have in your systems. They're adding some requirements about multi-factor authentication in 4.0. It's being required for all access into the card data environment. That's even from inside your network. So it used to be from outside your network you had to have multi-factor authentication. Now they're going to add that from inside as well as adding some other kind of features that you need to have in your solution. One of the things that we notice a lot is that people you'll type in your username and your password, and then they'll give you your third factor or your second factor, right? I think they're going to be looking for solutions that present all of those at the same time, and then when they say you failed, you don't know which one failed. You don't know whether the password or the one-time key or whatever failed. So some changes there in kind of the way things work. They're also making sure that these things are not, they can't bypass them, et cetera, et cetera. So a little more requirements there. Another thing in Section 8 is you can't put system or software passwords in files or scripts. Sometimes when you start up a piece of software, it will read a password for a database out of a file or put it in a script as you're running. So that's something that they're noticing has been a problem in compromises in the past. So you've got to think of another way to do that, whether it comes from an HSM or somebody types it in on startup, whatever it may be. There'll be some other solutions that'll come. That's a 2025 thing that's coming as well. Section 10, this one is a silly one, but they made a change and they actually made it future dated. No longer can you read all of your system logs by hand. I don't know anybody who does that. I mean, did one audit probably 18 years ago where somebody said that they reviewed all of their Microsoft security logs by hand, and I'm going, right. And they showed me a list of all the things they do, and so they are actually doing it. I don't think that's really possible nowadays. Most people use a SIM tool to actually do that, but that's a requirement they're making. You can't do manual log analysis anymore. It has to be automated. So that's a 2025 thing. Something that's changing right away in 4.0 is if you have a failure of any of the critical security controls is detected, it has to be alerted and responded to. So in other words, if your firewall goes offline or if a router or some part of your layered security is gone or is malfunctioning, you have to know when that's happening. That's something that service providers have had to do in 3.2.1, but now is being added for everybody. Section 11, now internal vulnerability scans have to be authenticated. So that's a 2025 thing, and that means, you get a lot more effective result if you're instead of looking at a software application or some sort of service from the outside, you have to provide a password as if you were inside the network and then look at those. I think it's preventing people from, once they get in somewhere, moving around easily inside the network. We see that happening a lot in our forensics team and our forensics analysis. So the council is making that a requirement. Many VA tools already do this. You just have to make sure that you know how they're storing any of these authentication, these passwords, things like that. Make sure that they're doing that in a PCI compliant manner. Self-assessment questionnaires are something that smaller merchants do, not typically what people that we work with, but there is a big change to a self-assessment questionnaire A, which is an e-commerce thing for people who are using iframes or maybe a button or a hosted payment page for doing their e-commerce. Before, you didn't really have to do scans or any kind of stuff for that page. In 4.0 for 2025, starting actually right away, you have to have VA scans if you've got an SAQA type of a page. If you're a merchant that just has to validate with one of these self-assessment questionnaires, you've got to have a scan. That's not a big deal. It's maybe a couple $100 a year. The harder one is the next one, which is a future dated one, which is deploy a change and tamper detection system for payment page monitoring. Any of the scripts that are on those payment pages now have to be monitored, and you need to know when they change from something that you expect. That's not file integrity monitoring. This is a dynamic thing that's detecting it, because mostly payment pages are being loaded dynamically. So it's not something you can just say, look at this file, see if the file changed. Because when that page is built, it often brings in 50 scripts from somewhere else. So this is a new process. It needs to run at least weekly. That's a new thing that's also being included in PCI DSS 4.0 for anybody who does e-commerce, and for the SAQs as well. So if you do a report on compliance, you have to do both of these things: scanning of a iframe page and also having this script detection methodology. There's a number of companies out there with solutions for that. SecurityMetrics has a solution for it, but a lot of other companies have those as well. Just be looking for those solutions. Probably testing those early on before 2025 would be helpful. The last section, PCI DSS 12, is, again, not a whole lot of changes there. They've moved kind of this annual scope reconfirmation kind of from the introduction, where they just sort of mentioned it and said, you should do this. Now it's a requirement in Section 12. You have to do a scope reconfirmation every year, and it has to be documented and proven. For service providers, you have to do it every 6 months. So that's a new thing. And if there's any kind of card data detected where it's not supposed to be, you have to exercise your incident response plan immediately. That's a change. Not like it's really a hard one or an odd one, but it does sort of imply that you might be doing some regular data discovery to make sure that you know where your card data is and that it's not leaking out in an unencrypted manner, looking at flows, documenting your flows and making sure that those flows aren't changing. Customized approach. This is that new validation method that I talked about. It has a lot of people buzzing about, well, should I use it, or is this the way it has to be done now, or is this going to save me a lot of time? I think we heard early on, well, that's great because I don't really want to meet that requirement, so I'm going to just ask my QSA to do a customized approach on it, and then I don't have to deal with it. That's not how it works. We'll talk about how that is. Now, we realize that compensating controls are not a replacement for, customized approach is not a replacement for compensating controls. Compensating controls are still possible and can be used in a report, but that's typically for something that's restricting. In other words, you have some sort of physical or legal constraint that you need, and that's where you use a compensating control. And a customized approach is if you can't meet the letter of the defined, here's what we want you to do in the standard, but you have another way that you think is better, you can say, I'd like to use the customized approach on that. The hard part is that it's really not the work of the QSA to define everything. That's the entity or the client's job. You have the hardest lift, the heavy lift in that you have to develop the control, test the control, document the control, do a risk analysis, prove that this control actually does meet the intent of the requirement, present that information to the QSA reviews it, then comes up with a testing procedure, and then you move forward. So it's something you've got to work together on. It's not something that you just say to the QSA, take care of this for me. So frankly, it's something that really is really for entities that have mature risk and IT teams. This is not for the faint of heart. It's a whole lot more work, and it's just, it really was made, some of the really large merchant and large banks bugged the PCI Council saying, hey, look, we'd like to do something different. They made it possible for that, but it really isn't for the run-of-the-mill company unless you've got a really well-defined risk process, a highly skilled IT team, all that kind of stuff. It's not impossible, but it's going to be probably harder and more expensive to do. So make sure you kind of have that understanding before you jump into that method. Learn all about those expectations before starting off on that path. So here's some of the main changes that are effective immediately. We mentioned that there was, I think, there were 13 of those. We're not going to go over every one, but here are the ones that I thought were the biggest ones. VA scans for SAQ or for a payment page that maybe you didn't used to have to scan is a big one. This targeted risk analysis process is kind of a new thing that's effective immediately. Formal reconfirmation of that scope annually, a documented process, that's a new thing. And then for every requirement, all 12 areas, they've added something, a big documentation chunk in each one of those. So yay, who likes to write? I love writing. I love reading writing, right? No, nobody really likes to do the writing stuff. So unfortunately, they're saying you need to document now the roles and responsibilities for performing any activities covered by this section, and you have to make sure they're documented, assigned, and understood and accepted, right, by people. So it's just sort of a table, it's a form. I'm sure your QSAs will have kind of some help there for some template documentation, but it's just another task, another lift that you've got to do right away for 4.0. So again, not massive, right? It's not like, oh no, I'll never be able to be 4.0 certified. You can do it as early as next year, or right away, even if you want. If your cycle is even before the end of the year, you could start on it, and just not really work on some of these future dated ones until you're ready for that. There was one, this has been a topic that came up, and it was quite a big idea. I don't know maybe if anybody's familiar. Has everybody heard of in-place with remediation as a finding? Is this something that anybody's heard about? When the new templates came out for the self-assessment questionnaires and for the report on compliance, there was a new column added. There was in place, not in place, and in place with remediation. And this was something that a lot of people, the council thought this is going to be awesome. This will be great, because then the companies can be basically put on notice and saying, hey, look, you're okay now, but I'm just letting you know that you didn't have this in place, and so you had to fix something, so make sure you're aware of that for next year's audit, kind of a type of thing. So it's a way of helping people understand, hey, if all of your requirements, or if a large portion of them, if your report is in place with remediation, you may have some problems with your process. So they thought it was a great thing. And it's not necessarily a bad thing as far as an auditor perspective. The hard part comes when you get lawyers involved. And a lot of companies were saying, wait a minute, I have a contract with a company to do their call center or whatever, and we're their call center, and they say that we have to be PCI compliant. They came to me and said, it looks like if you're in place with remediation, you were out of compliance during the year at some point, so therefore you owe us this money, right? Or we are canceling our contract with you because you were out of compliance. So, and that really wasn't the intent. That wasn't what the council wanted to do. A lot of people in industry, all the QSAs were kind of up in arms about it. So as part of the gear, I provided a lot of feedback to the council, and there was a lot of discussions, and they decided just a couple weeks ago to remove that whole validation column from the SAQs and from the ROC, so there really won't be that anymore. It's not something that will change. It'll still just be in place, not applicable. So that's removed. It'll be gone. See how happy she is? That's how happy I am too. It's going to be gone. They're replacing it with kind of a work paper or a worksheet that can be used as part of the assessment work papers. It's really the same thing that we've always done. We say, hey, look, here's the stuff that we did before. Here's the stuff that you guys, when we were on site, just wasn't quite right. If you just fix this, we'll be okay. A lot of it is documentation things, maybe, for example. So it doesn't really merit so much weight as it felt. And so there'll be a work paper that we can submit to customers that say, hey, this is some areas you need improvement. So that's what the compromise was with the council. So it's really letting kind of the auditors and all the IT people kind of do their jobs rather than getting involved in legal contracting issues. So that's a good thing. All right, well, to sum up, just study, get familiar with some of the bigger changes. Read the standard itself is a good idea. Read those changes documents. Consider engaging with the QSA to help. A lot of people are doing a gap analysis for 4.0 before you even have to worry about being compliant to 4.0. That's an option for you. You can move to 4.0 now and just work on the future dated stuff. You can make sure that you know about risk assessment expectations are being raised. Unless you're a real mature organization, don't even think about customized approach. And there's plenty of time. Just don't get caught behind the 8 ball and wait too long. So with that, if there are any questions, but no tomatoes. I don't need any tomatoes. Nobody throw that stuff. But if you have a question, I can try to answer it. This is free QSA time, right? No charge. Yes, sir.
So specifically around the risk assessments, there still seems to be like a fair amount of ambiguity in terms of like prove to your QSA that what you're doing is secure. Is there any other framework that they're using like crosswalk that, or?
Yeah. So the question is, risk assessment always is just a little vague, right? And the wording even now is just sort of like conduct a risk assessment and prove to your QSA that you're doing that your encryption key should be active for 6 months or 2 years or whatever the number is, right? We're using 12 character passwords or 14 character passwords, so ours should go for 2 years rather than 1 year or 6 months or something. More than 90 days, whatever it is. So you have something that you're going after. It'll be obvious in the standard which things that you've got to make these decisions on. And there are some well-documented risk assessment methodologies. NIST 800-30, it's a big animal, and really for handling whole networks and everything. You might be able to look at those and kind of say, well, I don't really need an inventory of all my systems. I may just need a fraction of that. So you're going to have to modify some of those, because they're not going for this massive process, but it just needs to be, hey, what have you thought about? Prove to me that, show me what you thought about, and let's work together even with your QSA and say, hey, look, here's why we think we don't have to change our passwords every 90 days. This is what we're doing. And here are the risks that really, the risks for that. You have to think, well, if I don't change my password, then it might be available in one of these password dumps, right? What is the chances that somebody has used this password somewhere else? If you have some sort of control over your employees and you could say, look, we auto-generate this password, you need to use it and save it in a different way. It's none of the passwords you've ever used. That may be a way of handling that risk that would be different. So it just needs to be defensible. And I don't think, as far as if I'm a QSA, I'm not going to say, okay, I'm sorry, you didn't do the gangly wrench version of the risk assessment published by the NIST and I just want to see that you've thought about all the things that could possibly compromise that password, for example, that period of time, and show me that is a reasonable time period. So I don't know if anybody else has, there's a bunch of the guys that I work with here, if they have any kind of thoughts on that, but. Yeah, Chris?
I was just going to say, I think the reason why they keep it so vague is there's so many different scenarios.
Yeah.
Right? So they have to keep it flexible so that anybody with whatever type of environment you have can account for the risks that they have.
Right. So unfortunately, it's always going to be vague, right? Because they want you to think. The what?
The culpability really falls on the QSA. So like if I am defensible in my argument as to why something is secure, if the QSA approves it, it's really on the QSA then. So
ultimately, the responsibility, your compliance is your responsibility.
Yeah.
The QSA makes the decision of whether or not they'll put their signature on your report. But at the end of the day, your compliance is still your responsibility.
Right. But we then become a team. When a QSA signs the report, hey, we're part of your compliance team a little bit, right? So it's not like we're just saying, yeah, we're signing it, but we're not taking any responsibility. No, QSAs take some responsibility, but it really should be. You should view it as it's not an adversarial or a competition type of environment. Think about your QSA as somebody that's there to help you out and work with them, right? And then you become a team. Any other questions? That was a good one. Oh, here, wait. I was going to say when somebody gives me a question, you get a T-shirt. Another question.
Are there any new SAQ types?
There are not any new SAQ types other than they have announced. So in other words, all the ones you're familiar with are still there. Just recently, they announced one that's called the SPOC QSA, right? And it doesn't have anything to do with logic, frankly. It's for mobile systems with an attached So like if you're at a store and somebody says, let me take your credit card, I have a phone here, they have to have a separate device that they're doing that on. Yeah. So it's a requirement for there. Pretty soon, they'll have a new requirement for MPOC, which is the mobile pin on COTS, on commercial off-the-shelf devices. They'll have a new one of those soon. So that's coming out, right? So let's see, did you get a t-shirt before? No? Do you want socks or t-shirt? All right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
As far as the passwords and files, is that just stand for plain text passwords, or is that encrypted as well?
So one more time. So as long as, repeat the question?
As far as the passwords inside files,
Oh, okay.
is that specifically referencing plain text passwords, or is that encrypted as well?
That is a good question. The question was, when they talk about passwords inside files not being available anymore, is that just for clear text, or could you encrypt it? I don't really know the answer to that question. I'm guessing it probably works for encrypted as well, but because that's usually how people are doing it, but I don't know. So ask me in 2 months. Oh, there we go, socks. And let's see, I don't know if I have anything else in my goodie bag. Oh, I just have a thing of water. If somebody else asks a question, you can go to our booth and get some socks, right? Or whatever you want. I didn't think we'd have this many. Anything else? I know it's almost time here, and it's this is kind of a yawny type of a topic. I appreciate everybody staying and those that came. Though if you're here, you're probably interested in it, and I appreciate your interest. Hopefully, it's been helpful. I'll be around the conference this week down at our booth. Somebody at our booth will know where I'm at probably, or could text me if you think of a question or if you have a question that you'd like to get answered. So this week, you got free QSA time with me if you can find me. All right? Thank you very much.